Welcome to this week's Hold My Drink podcast, where we navigate our political and cultural divides with a chaser of civility. We invite you to grab your favorite beverage and join us as we explore our differences and build bridges across our divisions.
Hi, this is Jeff, and I'm here with Trygve from Norway, is it?
Yep.
I think I will let him introduce himself. He is at CuriousNTT on Twitter. Hi, welcome.
Yeah, thanks. So, my name is Trygve Taranger, and it's probably easy for English speakers to refer to me as Entity or Curious Entity, which is why I chose that handle. I have a background in music, religion, media, and I've studied psychology off the books as well, and philosophy, and I've been around.
Oh, wow, I'm already excited. I think we're both drinking tea today, so we'll do a Hold My Tea episode. What are you drinking?
Yeah, so since you explained the thing about tea, I thought, hey, that sounds like a good idea. I should get something to drink as well. So I checked what we had, and tea looked like a good option because we had a full can lying around. So I just took something and put it in the microwave.
Okay, and I have this. It says kava. It has kava in it. It's a kava tea, and it relaxes. It has a relaxing effect. So I'm gonna have my kava tea. So we were talking earlier about. I know you have an interest in social justice, and we were talking earlier about the U.S. and you said you're starting to face it more and more, even where you are. So maybe we can start on that and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and when I say I've started to face it more and more, I really only started noticing it as far back as around 2014, 2015, though I didn't really understand what I was looking at then. But I'm not that old. At that time, I think, well, I guess I was about 14 years old, 14, 15, 16, that age.
Is that high school in Norway? High school?
Yeah, just about. I started noticing it around high school. And I started realizing that people who call themselves liberals didn't actually understand or believe in liberal principles. And I asked, why is that? So I tried looking into it and started following, the big names from that era, people like Sargon, because he did a lot of work trying to understand the philosophy of it and analyzing what was actually going on. And a couple of months later, Jordan Peterson came on the scene, and he kind of blew up.
Do you remember some of the incident, like some of the things you started to notice that made you see the dissonance?
Yeah, the first thing was probably something around 2012, I believe it was, when there was a local debate in Norway about somebody who had I think it was jokingly called somebody else a Jew, and then there was a serious debate on Facebook about how this was hateful language when it was used like that, and I defended it as within the realm of free speech, and I got some support for that. But that was the first encounter. A couple of years later, we had something in history class at high school, which caught my attention when we were told about the Second World War and how Norway had treated the Jews back then. So the books told us about how just under half of the Jews were taken to Germany, and you know what happened there. So obviously nasty stuff. But they also mentioned something else that I thought was curious that wasn't even mentioned by the teacher. So I just asked about it, and that was how just about all of the rest were smuggled to Britain, which suggests a lot more of a nuanced picture of Norway than the one was presented in class, which was one of just guilt, feel ashamed for what ancestors did. So my question was, shouldn't we be proud that about half of our ancestors helped them as well? And the class went dead silent and didn't know what to think.
What did the teacher say?
Just shocked. There wasn't really a response. The class kind of just moved on.
Wow.
But around the same time, I started having some weird dreams, which made me even more interested when Peterson started talking about dreams and Freud and Jung and all of that, because this dream fit right in. So I dreamed that the high school I was at, which is a high quality one that was very recently built at the time, which specialized in the arts. So you know what kind of people are usually drawn to the arts? Open, creative people who also happen to tend to be on the left. So we had this kind of people in a huge fancy new building, and in my dream, this building was one of the places that appeared, and they kind of just swapped at random. It was inside the building, with the concert hall replaced by a giant, labyrinthine playground kind of thing, a giant multi-level maze. And I dreamed that everybody I knew at school were in that maze, and everybody was lost. But I was the one. I got to the top of the maze and looked down, and then I saw that one of the first floor rooms was actually a place where people got brainwashed. So that's quite the dream.
That's a striking image.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. That's why I still remember it.
Where did you go from there?
Well, let's see. I think that was early 2016, late 2015-ish. So it was before Peterson got on the scene. But from then I got to I started going to a university college to learn about music more. I've been told that our courses at the high school were at the college level, and it turned out they were right, because there was very little new stuff to learn.
Oh.
But that meant I had plenty of time to do other things, and I got involved in student politics around the second year, because I heard some of the speeches they made, and it's just struck me that it was very kind of collectivist feeling. I don't remember exactly what they were saying, but it seemed like they were thinking about people as a mass rather than as people, as singular people, and that bothered me a little. So I said I put myself up for election, saying that I would make sure to remember people as individuals, and got enough support to get in.
You got elected?
Yeah, I think substitute position, but still an election, you know.
Were you able to do anything effective?
Yeah, I had some effects, but for the most part, it was within reason. It really started getting crazy. Well, the sentiment of the parliament was crazy from the start, but there were two voices of reason there, so it wasn't all that bad. Turns out if some people speak up, people start hesitating, you know. So we had me and one who I later came to know a lot better. Became friends with him about 4 years later, after really clashing in there, because both are very, very strong-minded with powerful opinions. He's probably one of the most intelligent people I know, but he has also had a very nasty background, and it had impacted him a lot more than it did later. That was before he found Peterson had a personal change of heart and development. But as for me, well, I haven't changed very much since before then. I was pretty stable. So we had us talking about things in a very different way, and challenging ideas such as, hey, we need to use up the remaining money we get from the state, because if we don't, we're going to get less next year, and we totally need all this money that we don't know what to use for. So yeah, I challenged that idea and said, if you want to do it for PR, let's at least use it for something that lasts, instead of something that goes away in a year or something. And didn't have an effect. But later, last year I was there, we got some more interesting cases, because then we had a certain request from the administration to announce on behalf of the school, of the college, that we would boycott Israel. And that just seemed out of place, you know, for a parliament to say on behalf of its constituents.
You're talking about the government, the Norway parliament?
No, the student parliament.
Okay.
Student parliament, so local democracy. Make the decision for the entire college. And I thought, this seems like it goes too far. So I just voiced that in our chat room and said, I don't know about this. It seems like this is not our place. And people agreed, so that case was dropped.
Oh.
But two people were very, very enthusiastic for it and seemed really disappointed by that development.
And what year is this around?
That was, I want to say last year, actually.
So after the George Floyd, or around the George Floyd?
After. It didn't actually change very much in Norway, at least not where I was. Small town, you see. Small, very scenic town with almost only one thing of interest to it, which was the college.
Oh,
I noticed a lot more of George Floyd when I later moved to the biggest university in the country, where I'm right now. NTNU is called. There
so
you see it in the streets.
I'm really quite ignorant about Norway. Like I said, I watched the Scandinavian mysteries on streaming, but that's my only window.
Right.
You don't have the history with African Americans and racism and that the U.S. does, and it's predominantly white. It seems so. What form is it taking there? Like, how is it manifesting in Norway? What are they using in Norway to get converts, I guess?
Well, I think the main cases they're using right now or causes, I should say, are the the Lap, Lapmi communities, our own indigenous people, where they try to apply post-colonial theory to get people along, and also the trans stuff, you know.
Oh yes, because that's happening everywhere. The trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have more too, though. We have systemic sexism, for example. They talk about that. I ran into that in a committee last year.
Is that the
It,
patriarchy? Like
it is
you're a
kind
white
of
male oppressor?
how I ran into it was we had to settle on a plan for PhD grants in the committee I was on, the research and development committee, and I read through all the documents, and they described how this process was selected in part based on the sex of the applicant, and I said, I know that we are legally obligated to do it like this in Norway because we are, but I can't in good conscience assent to this. So instead, I just would like to not vote on this case because I can't offer an alternative that would fulfill my conscience while also complying with the law. So I said just about that and got a small rant from the administration there about how systemic sexism was in place and we still had a long way to go. Which, of course, everybody who knows about the equality paradox knows that it's the other way around, if anything.
Talk a little bit about the equality paradox, because another thing with you is you have kind of a unique take on what, because you're seeing it from a perspective that a lot of us don't or are not able to. So, I want to hear about the equality paradox, but then maybe also a little bit about your view of why this is happening, how it's happening, where you see it maybe headed, and things we could do to turn it around.
Right. So, first of all, maybe let's start with the equality paradox, just the basic idea. It's most people who follow John Peterson have probably heard him talk about it, and truth be told, I haven't looked into it personally very much, but the tendency is pretty clear, and everybody I've checked out seem to find the same thing, which is that the more equal a country is considered, the greater the gender differences or the sex differences along various metrics. So I think it was Iran or something, which had a far higher ratio of female STEM. What's the word? STEM. Well, people at least.
Graduates or students?
Yeah, graduates is good. So there are far more female STEM graduates, and you would think the opposite, right? Because Norway is very intent on removing all these kinds of barriers, and if anything, this country has it the other way around, being Islamic and all of that. But that's not what we find. So the basic idea that's been posited to explain it is that as we remove all the societal barriers, what we're left with is personal choice, and those choices are going to be They are going to have tendencies that differ across the sexes, for example.
Is that where bias comes in, or implicit bias?
You could talk about biases, but I think implicit it's kind of silly here because it's a different kind. This is more like what you want bias, rather than how you rate things. Motivation, interest, which is obviously sexist to talk about in these days on these topics.
I mean, I call all of that nature, and I know there's a big debate now on sex differences and biological differences in male nature, female nature. Are they really different?
Yeah, there is definitely debate going on, and it seems to never die, even though the evidence is pretty clear as far as I've understood. And the gender equality paradox is itself evidence, because unless you want to say that the things we've been doing to forward gender equality have done the opposite, and we are not actually more gender equal than, say, Iran. And in that case, Iran is a more feminist and more fair country than Norway and USA and all of these. Unless you want to say that, and that the entire methodology that has been applied accomplishes the opposite of what it tries to do, then you're going to have to say that it just doesn't work like that.
That sounds like logic, rationality, reason, all the stuff that's oppressive.
Of course, it is a master's tools, and if you've been following the whole, I think it was Aubrey Lord or something who said that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Yeah, it can't beat it at its own game temporarily, but if you continue applying the master's tools, which I'm happy to because I believe those tools are pretty good.
I do too.
Then it's going to reassert and go back to defending the oppressive systems, as they would say.
I never understood that phrase anyway. Like, I don't see any reason the master's tools couldn't be used to dismantle if they work. Like, there's nothing about the fact that they're just because there's the tools of the master.
Yeah, but that's a Marxist idea, you know. You have this idea of the basis and the superstructure in the most simple terms. When I come to this idea in our books on philosophy, I was completely flabbergasted. I don't think people understand the full ramifications of it, but you have this basic idea that you have the physical resources and ability to use them. That's the basis, right? And then you have the superstructure on top. And the superstructure has a primary function, and that primary function is to preserve the system as it stands right now, to resist change. And it contains art, it contains philosophy, it contains law, it contains religion, it contains philosophy, and all of the rest. So the idea is that that all of these things are part of the structure that's designed by nature, let's say, to preserve itself. So it's going to resist problems within it. That's the idea. And it's a fundamentally flawed idea on so many levels that it's just frustrating to think about, really. But that is the Marxist idea of how this works. And in that frame, right, you have the master's tools. The master's tools are the superstructure. The superstructure protects itself. So the idea, yeah.
That's history, philosophy, like all the stuff you described. It's changing all the time. Like, so it's not this static monolith that they see it as. And there's a political process that we can use to make change. So I think the way they see it is distorted to begin with. Like, I don't see this superstructure, this inflexible, rigid superstructure.
Yeah. If you did, you'd be woke.
Huh?
If you did, you would be woke.
Well, it makes me wonder about their sense of their own power. Like, if they see things that need to change, have they tried to work within the process to make those changes? Because a lot of times they can be effective. Or it seems like the assumption that the system is set up to perpetuate itself and is never going to change has not been challenged on a personal, individual level by it's just a belief they adopt in place of actual experience or personal agency or trying to make change.
Yeah. At the same time, though, they think that if they just realize that they can change it together and just move as a mass, then they can change it and get a better system. So this is what makes me think that James Lindsay, when he talks about how it's a Gnostic religion, This is what makes me think he's right. That they have this idea that if just everybody awakes to the idea, that they become woke to the fact that they are actually able to change the world as they see it into what they want it to be, which is actually a huge leap, because there's a huge difference between being able to change something and being able to get what you want from it.
Right. Like I don't necessarily have a problem that they realize their power to make change. Like,
yeah, I don't either, but that's a troll's truism. You know, have you read the Shackle paper on the vacuative postmodernist methodology?
Nope.
No, so it just tries to use the postmodernist game, and postmodernist is basically synonymous with Marxist and radical in this case. It's not the same, but it's close enough that you don't need to worry about the differences. So it tries to use their rhetorical game against them by naming the mechanics, the dynamics they use. And one of them is the troll's truism. So a truism is something that is true on the face of it, right? A troll's truism is something that is true on the face of it, but doesn't mean what it sounds like. So, for example, you have the everything is constructed idea, and anything constructed can be constructed differently. You can say, yeah, it can be constructed differently, but are there limits to that? And if you're part of this tradition, this Marxist tradition, chances are you would say no to the latter one. There are no limits to that.
It never stops.
It's not that it never stops. It's that I think you can have the perfect world.
What do they want? Like, if, and I'm sure they don't all agree, and they're going to infight at some point.
Absolutely.
What is it? A world with no white men? What is their What is their vision of equality, or an ideal world, or a perfect that they're moving toward?
So there's probably at least two kinds of people here. One of them would say that the ideal world is one where everybody recognizes that they are equal, and
we have that.
And then they think that means that everybody gets the same. They think everybody recognizes that they're equal means equal outcomes.
I was probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 years old when I realized that's not realistic. Like, that's just not realistic. It's not how humans are. Like, probably any animal species, and it's nobody's fault. That's just the given of our condition.
Yeah, but this tradition believes that everything we call nature, which you alluded to earlier, is actually something that's been called nature by the superstructure to justify keeping things as they are. They're skeptical to it because it limits change.
Okay.
It's a very deep philosophical disagreement, and it's really, you could even argue that it's a theological disagreement, that they think that nature is constructed by humans in order to limit what humans construct.
They can't, nature, like, there's something external called nature. Obviously, like, they're not denying. Like, I know the Gnostics and
they're not denying it, but they're confused. And that's one of the consequences of using things like trolls truisms all the way. It's not only trolls truisms either. It's not just things that are true but sound like they mean something else and they actually do. You also have this thing called an equivocating fulcrum, which is recognized as a radical redefinition of something. So you take something like truth and say that truth is what is, I like to say, what is reliable, but a more common definition is something like truth is what corresponds to reality, right? And then you get Foucault. And what does Foucault say about truth? Truth is a system of managing, generating, and so on statements. That's a radical redefinition, because now it's no longer talk about corresponding to or reflecting reality in a way that is reliable. Now it's a matter of the system that decides what is true, and he's made those things synonymous. And that's a radical redefinition. And the result of that radical redefinition is that when people who follow him talk about it, you don't know which one of these they mean. And if they're thoroughly convinced, they won't know which one they mean. They won't think there's a difference.
It seemed like this used to work itself out in the academies. If they were going to redefine something, everybody would debate it and discuss, and it would just happen organically or naturally. At some point, like, I don't know how it captured the academies. If I were a professor in a classroom and somebody walked in and said, you need to start teaching this racism or this oppressive, I would tell them to get out and let me teach. Like, that's stupid. doesn't match logic, reason, but at some point, either the critical thinkers
Stop
capitulate.
that. You don't need to say critical. Just say thinkers.
The thinkers capitulated, or they got pushed out. Like,
Yeah.
but I don't know how people like me and you and the professors I know can be in a classroom and just go along with this. But at some point, and I'm still fascinated how it happened, the academies, like, this made its way in. It got past the defenses of the thinkers that, to me, should have stopped all this at the gate.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen.
Yeah, and there's lots of reasons for that. We can go into some if you want. So, for starters, fundamentally, this Marxist idea of the base and the superstructure, when you look at the implications are a conspiracy theory. They think that the superstructure is conspiring. It's conspiring through people to limit freedom. And they would think of it as freedom. And that's why they talk about liberation all the time.
What freedom to do what? What freedom do they not have?
They don't think about freedom like that.
Okay.
But if they did, they would do it from a Habermasian perspective, where they see what it looks like people are free to do, and then they would say, "Can I do that?" And if not, well, you're not free to do that. So you don't have equal rights, for example. But
what would be like a realistic example? Like, free to own yachts and mansions is one thing, but what's a realistic?
here's one that is probably going to hit some people very close to home. So the freedom to be called by the pronoun you're used to, the pronoun you want. That's not a freedom people have, but it seems like it because the overlap between what people expect to be called and what they physically are is usually present, but in a certain group of people it's not. And so they don't have that freedom, they don't have that right. But it's not actually right. It just looks like that to a bad rational reconstruction following Habermas.
I mean, I don't have a problem with people wanting to be called certain things. For me, it's the gaslight. Like, they want to be called something where you have to suspend your entire sense of reality in order to.
And I think that's a right.
It's not a simple social convention like saying "ma'am" or "sir." There's something. You have to fundamentally, like, shift your reality to give them what they're asking for.
Yeah, and I think you can do that.
And it's not a right. I don't think it's a right we all have. Like, I don't.
It's not a right fundamentally. It's a privilege. The privilege of having your experience of yourself match what people assume it to be.
I don't even like gender fluidity or whatever, non-binary. So, say you're non-binary. That means at any given moment you could fall anywhere on the male-female spectrum. I can't.
Well, that's the fluid thing. That's a fluid thing.
Well, gender fluid. That's invisible to me. I don't know what's going on in your head every second. To me, you look male. So to expect me to be tuned into your non-binariness, which is highly subjective, I can't see any of it. Even if I wanted to give you that, how could I realistically do it when I don't know what gender you are at any given moment? There's no way for me to tell visibly. And so I'm just kind of going along with your word.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I'm genuinely affirming that you're that gender, because I can't. It doesn't have any meaning for me. So it's just a little social convention that I'm playing along.
And moreover, you can't do it before you know the person.
Right.
When you see the person on the street and you don't know them and you're not going to interact at all beyond just seeing that person, you might say, there was this guy over there. He had a pretty funny look to him. And, oh shit, this person identifies as a G.
But they still come across. That's the tension. Because
but you wouldn't know because you had to assume.
Yeah. I call people that by what they look like to me, like the impression they make on my brain. It's usually male or female.
That's what most people do, I imagine.
And that's it. That's as complex as I'm able to get. So if they want something more sophisticated than that, I can't give them that, even if I wanted to.
Yeah. And that's really how how it should be. I think people should just be able to understand that some things you have to assume, and you assume based on what is practical for you. And if it lines up with what you expect or what the other person expects, nice. If it doesn't, well, shit. Let's not make too big of a deal about it, because it's after all just a couple of words.
Right.
And it wasn't meant in a bad way in any way, anything. It was just said.
It's not hatred. It's not phobia. It's not animus or any of
But that's where they get you with the idea of microaggressions.
Yes. and I work in mental health, and if someone came to me, I could easily help them to handle those kind of microaggressions. They wouldn't even be an issue. So I don't even know what they want there.
Well, one of the things it could do, I don't know how many patients you've encountered who struggle with microaggressions, but to me, as an outsider to the field, it seems perfectly plausible that somebody could be so worried about microaggressions that they respond by seeing, oh, you did something that I consider a microaggression, I can't trust you. And so you don't get that report, Do you think that could happen?
The report?
Yeah, so the relationship of trust, right? That you don't, mental health, you don't manage to connect to the person you're trying to help, and so
report. Yeah.
I barely ever hear that word spoken. So
I have not had a client come to me, like, their issues are usually not microaggressions. There's usually real stuff, trauma.
No wonder.
Life goals. No one's ever come to me to say I was microaggressed. Help me.
Yeah, but one of the things that these critical theories do, or this critical Marxism does, is that it trains people to see it, and once they see it, they have these kinds of layers of defense that can be put up, even from people not trying to help. I lost a friend over that once.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it was somebody I had worked with on preparing a concert, because musician and all of that, and just after Trump got elected, I'm going to say she, because she looked like she at the time. She considered herself trans, but was still definitely physically a female. Called herself Dan. I don't think I can say much more than that, just to keep anonymity and all of that. But she posted something on Facebook about how terrified she was that Donald Trump had been elected on the other side of the ocean, and how she thought that it showed that people wanted to kill people like her.
It was pretty scary. Like, I panicked and freaked out too. Me and all my liberal friends did. None of us thought it meant that people wanted to kill. Like, that's a leap. Like, that's an emotional leap. That can come from trauma. That can come from inexperience, naivete. Yeah. But
moreover, we're looking at Trump here, and Trump is not very well reported on for this. But I think he was the first Republican to put up a pride flag on one of his rallies.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so that's no joke. If anything, this guy and people who follow him would know that he supports their rights as equal human beings, and there's no reason to assume that he and his supporters don't.
Well, I mean, he did do the transgender ban in the military.
In the military, yeah. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that, not least the Christian part of the base. But let's just say a ban on a dangerous job is not the same as wanting to kill someone.
That I agree.
Yeah, so we should try to keep a cool head when talking about these kinds of things. And that ban was not even on the table at the time when this friend of mine made this post on Facebook. And so what I did was I just pointed out the facts I knew about it, and how she could relax because it didn't look like it was going to be that big of a deal. And I never heard from her again.
Was this all social media that it happened?
It was.
Person.
Because we moved to different places to continue studying after high school.
I lost a friend too over social media. Like, we used to hang out on Zoom all the time. We were fine, but on Facebook and Twitter, that's where the communication starts to break down, and I lose the friends. You mentioned keeping a cool head, and one of the things I want to try to figure out is what to do about all this. So is everybody keeping a cool head a good first step when we're approaching this? Like,
well, it's definitely hard when it's personal. I can say that for sure. I've had recently I ran into it head on, and it's just not fun at all. It's very hard to stay clear-minded.
What
So
happened?
I don't think I can say too much because it's kind of still ongoing.
Oh,
But one of the things I did was I told people that you actually have to assume pronouns sometimes. And for this, I was put to the question on: do I understand that people are equal human beings? And well, I do. But let's say a lot more was happening at the same time, and I was extremely stressed out, and some of it was a bit more personal, and it made it really hard to see clearly what was going on. So yeah,
so what is the way forward then?
when you can, it definitely helps to slow down, just to make sure that you don't jump to conclusions. Jumping to conclusions is very often going to leave a couple of steps that aren't looked at properly, and those steps, well, if there's a trap there, you're probably going to step on it.
So
So
everybody on all sides, to the extent that they can, just
yeah,
calm down.
yeah, and it won't be 100% for anyone probably, but the more you can do it, the less you're going to get things wrong, and the less you get things wrong, the easier it will be to communicate.
Okay.
So that's at least a thing I can think of is a big start. And beyond that, I think people need to understand that what we're looking at here is actually a religion. Fundamentally, it is. That is not to say anything bad about religions. It is a religion among others, but this is a religion that doesn't understand it's a religion. It thinks it's science, and so it acts with the authority of science in ways that religions are outlawed from doing.
It also doesn't have the foothold, at least in the U.S., that our other religions do.
Yeah. Well, it seems to have a foothold in most religions, most normal religions, and because people don't know, they try to have both at the same time. But the foothold is definitely much more a matter of the tyranny of the majority, or the feeling of the majority. You know, social tyranny. The idea, yeah. So we're looking at the social tyranny on the basis of it, which makes it feel like it is everywhere when it is in fact not. But it is in a lot of places, and it tries to get into all positions of power it can because it thinks that's where it can do real change. And obviously, if you want to change the system to replace it with the perfect system, well, where would you go where you can change things? Obviously. So yeah, it goes into all these kinds of places, and it tries to change things, and you will usually do it by way of something like a radical redefinition, as I mentioned, equivocating fulcrum. Learn to watch for those. Notice them when they happen, and remember, if the person who made the redefinition says something later, and it seems to build on that redefinition, just remember, it might be the opposite of what is the case for the normal definition, and so it shouldn't be treated as the same. If anything, you should probably try to find another word for it, so you don't confuse it in your mind.
That sounds like good advice. My experience with Christians, just like talking and arguing with Christians, it's very difficult to get people, if this is a religion or religion like, it's very difficult to get people to see that. So if part of the solution depends on exposing that or enlightening people to what they're involved in, I'm not very hopeful about that. What can the rest of us do that clearly see that it has all the features of a religion that doesn't involve necessarily getting the woke to see that? Or are there things we can do on a practical level to protect and advance ourselves?
I think so, but it's a little bit harder to pinpoint. For my own part, I've been trying to kind of vaccinate people against it by teaching them how to see the let's just say the rhetorical tricks, the maneuvers that are being used by this, and understand how they cause problems and why they are not reliable, so that they will see, oh, they're using that here, it's not reliable, and so they'll kind of insulate themselves against it, so they don't need to be told, essentially.
That's what you do a lot on Twitter with your.
Yeah, a lot of what I do on Twitter and a lot of what I do in classes.
How is it working? Like on social media, I can see the benefit of it. Does it work on a personal level?
I think it mostly works on people who already understand what is going on. The friends I have who I talked about these kinds of things, they are very impressed by how deliberate and able I am to do it. But part of the problem here is that it's on a very abstract level, and most people are not interested in doing anything more than just getting through the courses.
Right.
So they'll see it as a digression, and will just say, or they'll think, "Can we just move on?"
Mm-hmm.
And well, we could move on, and we should move on if there wasn't a big problem here that's going to have downstream effects. We don't want those downstream effects, and they don't understand that, and it's unfortunate. But I think that in universities, you kind of have to be careful about it because there's so many people who could be triggered by it, and I don't mean triggered in the good old meme sense, right? The triggered SJW kind of thing. I mean, I'm thinking about it a bit more abstractly. So since I read a little about Peterson's psychology, I'm thinking we have personalities within our brains, various different personalities, and they deal with different parts of our lives. And what this ideology has done for a lot of people is that it has created let's just say, a social justice warrior personality. And what you want to avoid doing is you want to avoid to trigger this personality in them by what you say to them. It will be a little different people, and it has different axes. You have one for race, you have one for sex, and so on.
How do you do that? I'm autistic. I struggle with that as it is, like walking very delicately. And how does somebody even begin to do that? I don't know if I'm having a casual conversation or even a substantive.
Yeah, it's really unfair. But if you are to deal with this, you have to be on a higher level than the people you're dealing with intellectually to be able to avoid falling into pitfalls. I'm very sorry for all the people who see it as bullshit, understand it is bullshit, but are too clumsy with the words to get it across without getting people to explode in their faces.
I think I'm one of those people. What do you? I do try though. Say you do trigger someone. What do you? Is there? What do you? How do you? What do you do from there? How do you recover from that, or keep it from escalating once you've realized you've triggered this personality?
I think that's probably very personal, so I can't give general advice. But I would think that it's not a good idea to try to do something to fix it while emotions are high. It's probably best to let it simmer down a little bit first in some way.
There's
so
something
make it
about
calm down
Twitter
first.
specifically that escalates. Like you're so tempted to fire off that angry, and it keeps spiraling up to the next level. And I even get pulled into that without even realizing. Next thing I know, I'm in the middle of this huge Twitter fight, and I don't even know how it happened. So there's something about Twitter that's very seductive in drawing people into those escalations. And one of the things we're working on with our group, Andrew and Neil and all of us, is how to minimize that. Like, what are some things people can do to not send off that tweet or not get caught in one of those escalation spirals on social media?
Yeah, I have a rule I follow that I can probably share on here that I think is good, but also kind of demanding, especially when you start with it. It's quite a simple rule on the face of it. So it's just when you're not obviously joking, try to only say things that you think you can defend.
Normally, I mean, I think I do.
Yeah,
Everybody.
it's a good measure, but you should stop before you post at least and think, am I going too far here?
But a lot of that depends on knowing the other person, like being able to.
Yeah, and it's not like there's not problems with that approach either. I mean, for one, if you do that consistently, as I've tried to do, you're going to end up being able to. Everything you're going to say is going to build on things that build on things that build on things that build on things ad nauseum, which makes it an overwhelming force for people who are not expecting it, and that is not very conducive to good social interactions. So, I guess, we should always remember, and it's kind of a very surface thing to say, but people are complicated. They don't understand fully what they're doing, and we need to have some respect for that. And remember that it also includes us. We don't know fully what we're doing, so we should extend that charity and always have a door open for people to not explode. Now, if they do take the option to explode and you give them a way out, well, at least they did it and not you. And then you should probably consider: is it good for me to keep this up? Is it good for them if we keep this up? So I've broken off a couple of conversations by saying I think we're both going to regret it if we continue.
I do that too, and then they'll type something else after that, and I'll have to type something back, and then I just pull right back in. So you at some point, you're just like, I'm done. You walk away, you close it off, and you don't get pulled back into it.
Well, I try to not get pulled back into it. I mean, it's not easy, right? It is a very tempting thing to get into, especially when people are in that snippy, snarky mode, and they try to give you a gotcha, and it's almost a gotcha, but not quite. And so you really want to show them why it's not a gotcha. But at some point, you just have to realize that if you keep doing that, you're going to waste your life on it, and you're probably going to make everybody mad in the process.
Yeah, I hate that you're right, but I think you are right.
I hate it too.
I have this theory, and I'm dying to try it out, that this stuff doesn't happen it's not going to happen on Zoom, or it's not going to happen in the same way. That there's something about that medium that it lends itself to this, or is vulnerable to those kind of interactions. I got in a Twitter fight a few days ago with some trans activists, and I invited them on a Zoom. I'm like, well, let's take this on a Zoom and see if it changes the discussion. But they didn't want to come. They refused.
Yeah, they could think, based on the theory, they could think of that as giving legitimacy to hate.
I think it's an opportunity to.
Yeah, and that's a fundamental difference between worldviews here. In the social constructionist worldview that this Marxist tradition is built, everything we do is what builds reality. Nature is only what we make it, and so on. As I said earlier, that's how they fundamentally think about it. And people are confused. They don't think about this in this way for everything, but they think about it in this way for some things, and they don't understand that it doesn't match up with the rest because they haven't thought about it, because they haven't had to. And if you force them to think about it, they'll get mad because cognitive dissonance is a pain.
Mm-hmm.
But so really, the best way is to just try to get them around it when they're not mad. And when you try to get them around it, just wade through that minefield with care, because there are plenty of mines that are going to trigger if you step wrong. It takes courage. It takes virtues of all kinds. But I don't see another way to deal with it.
Talk a little bit about social constructivism, because I know that comes up a lot in your Twitter work.
Yeah, not least in my pinned tweet, which is about how social constructionism, the word social construct is fundamentally misleading. So when we talk about something being constructed, or somebody being a construction worker, for example, we talk about it as if they built something with intent. And in those cases, that's true.
Like Legos.
Yeah, and we talk about scientific constructs. Those are also devised with intent to capture some meaning about the world.
Mm-hmm.
So in those cases, it also seems legitimate to call them constructs. But there's a lot of things that we call constructs, especially that this tradition calls constructs, which are most likely not built on intent, which they just assume are built on intent implicitly by using that word, and probably not realizing it. One of those Troll's truisms things. As I said, everything constructed can be constructed differently. According to Shackle, that was the Ur-truism of the Ur-Troll, the one at the bottom of everything. And I think there's definitely something to that. The question is how deep that goes. But that if you look at what people talk about with social constructs, you might notice that most of the social constructs people talk about are related to something they consider oppressive.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who have followed my work on Twitter, they'll see that I've spoken a lot about the master-slave dialectic in the last half year or so. That's because I think that everything they say about social constructs in this sense, talking about social constructs of domination, which they don't usually feel the need to say, but it's pretty clear from the context if you just look at it. The social constructs of domination are, in this worldview, built on the master-slave dialectic. So in that dialectic, you have subjects. Subjects are sources of change. People are subjective. They are subjects. Every person is a source of change. Groups are also sources of change. So groups are also subjects in this model. And the idea is that you have two subjects that meet. and they are equal, but they don't understand it. Or let's say they are equal, but not in a physical way. And so they think they have to fight, and so they struggle, and one comes out on top. And what that one does then is it constructs, there's that word, it constructs a system to preserve its status as master and the subordinate status of the other.
That's from the point of view of the slave. Like the slave is saying that that's what's happening, right?
No,
Or
that's from the point of view of the theorist,
Hegel.
who projects it onto the slave with a true consciousness. So Marx, for example, who was not, I don't think most people consider Marx with his life supported by the obviously bourgeois Engels to be a proletarian man. I think he's more of a poet and a poet and such than he is, let's say, poet and theologian than he is anything else. People treat him as a scientist and so on, but no, he's more of a poet. Just look at his language.
Apparently, he's very inspiring.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, how would you get people to follow you this much if you weren't? But inspiring doesn't mean right. That's important to remember too. But you have this constructs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Marxists originally looked at money as this kind of thing. So money accumulates, and we value money as a social construct because it lets us get what we want, because other people agree about it. They construct it socially that it is valuable. That's how they think about it. And so it is built with the intent of value. And that value just so happens to get into the pockets of the wealthy. Now, that means that money is part of the system of domination in this theory. And so the perfect system does not have the traits of domination. It has removed all the social constructs of domination. And you'll see this when they talk about gender as a social construct. They want to remove gender. You'll see this when they talk about sex as a social construct. They want to remove sex from the social relationships to get rid of all the oppression based on sex. You see about money. They want to remove money from the equation. So I think that probably the most controversial case of this I could point to now would be you will own nothing and you will be happy.
Yeah.
Because private property is a social construct. After all, they follow Rousseau on this. It is somebody managed to fool somebody else to think that something belonged to him, and so we got the social construct of property, including wealth, which is a symbol of which is part of the system of domination. So they want to remove all of these systems of domination and all the social constructs which comprise them.
Well, it sounds like they want to do it with hierarchy in general, which I don't think is real. I'm a group facilitator, and I run a lot of groups, and I can tell you, if you get even 4 or 5 people together in a room, like this natural hierarchy is just going to form anywhere throughout time, throughout history, the animal kingdom. This seems like pie in the sky idealism, like just completely unrealistic. Yeah. What if we were all beautiful, wealthy, rich? Like this seems like a child.
No, beauty is a social construct because it creates stratification. You have the beautiful and the ugly, right? So they think
nature creates
beauty is part of it.
Like these hierarchies emerge. Like they're not created.
Yeah,
they emerge.
And emerge is a key word because I propose that people should stop talking about social constructs and start talking about intersubjective emergence. So between subjects, I accept that they talk about subject. Hegelians and Marxists and all of this, they love talking about subjects, but subject is a valid word sometimes, and it's older than that. So I'll say intersubjective. It is something that more people recognize, and it has emerged. People don't understand how, but it came about. And it might have an intention behind it, it might not. We don't know that yet. So we should talk about emergence instead of constructs, to stop implying that there's an intention when we don't know. And also to stop implying that it's definitely social, because it is recognized by people, it is not limited to the social. Or we don't know, at least.
Have you had success with that?
Everybody I've spoken to about it seemed to like the idea. And we could note also that in this frame, the word social construct would be an intersubjective emergence. So it is subject to continuous emergence, and we could start talking about something else instead. for example, the more accurate intersubjective emergence.
I feel like we're getting to the good stuff right at the end. Would you? Neil couldn't be here today. He was supposed to join us too. Would you want to come back and do a follow up, and we can have
Sure.
me? And,
Sure.
Okay. Well, let's do that, and we can start with the intersubjective emergence.
Okay. There's a lot more we could talk about. I
feel like I've just got started. I could sit here for all day and have these conversations.
Yeah. The first time I spoke to a PhD, I shocked her by talking for 6 hours about stories.
Oh man, well, you should come on. You should come on one of our Zooms. We had our book clubs. We went 11 hours one night. We went 10 hours the next week. They averaged 6 or 7 hours.
That's cool.
I think there's definitely room for these conversations. Well, Curious Entity, thank you very much for being our guest today, and hopefully we'll get to do it again.
I'd be happy to.
You have a Quora, you said, you have Twitter. Do you have a blog, or is there any social media that you want to let people know about?
Well, I've written a couple of essays on minds, where I go by the name of The Entity.
Okay. We'll put all of this in the description link too.
Yeah, and I have a YouTube channel which I mostly use to post comments. There's some music on there as well, and I might start posting more idea related stuff.
Is it music
in the near future?
Made? Your music?
Yeah, music I made, and some lists I made some more than 10 years ago of cool video game music, because I think people should look more at video game music. There's a lot of great stuff in there.
My roommate is making a video game, and he's working on the music, so I hear it in his room all the time. What? Just send me the links that you want posted, and we'll get them in the description. Is there anything that you want to close with, or want us to know about you or your work?
Well, I probably spent more time studying these social phenomena and these ideas than I've spent officially studying. And I've been studying full time for 6 years. So
this is not even your main area?
No.
What do you want to do with it, like going forward? What's your career goal?
I think that I have something to contribute to this whole problem between religion and atheism thing.
I
think I have something to contribute to peace between the two sides. And if we're building on the idea that both of them are actually dedicated to truth, and that they use different, that some things people consider propositions are actually definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could just say, do I accept this definition? Can I work with this definition even though I would rather define it slightly differently? And I'd say signs point to yes.
Well, maybe next time on our second episode we can try a conversation around this intersubjective emergence and see what emerges between three of us. Like we can give a live example or model.
That would be of dia or tria logos. These words borrowed from John Wabeki. It's nice to talk again.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on, and we'll do it again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hold My Drink. Like or subscribe to the show and check out the show notes to see what each of us is reading. Different news with different views. You can find us at holdmydrinkpodcast.com, all major podcast platforms, and on YouTube. Or subscribe on Substack at truthinbetween.substack.com so you never miss an issue. If you want to join our Discord community, drop us a line. And until next week, may your conversations be constructive and your divisions diminished. Cheers.